Every now and then, a moment involving a child hits social media so hard that the entire internet seems to freeze. Not a superstar, not a business mogul, not even a chart-topping rapper. A child. And when that child is Imani Ashkadum, the daughter of Nipsey Hussle, you already know there was no chance this story was going to fade away quietly. As details began making their rounds online, people immediately started connecting pieces. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that something shocking had unfolded because Nipsey Hussle's daughter had seemingly exposed her own mother. And this wasn't some vague claim that could be easily ignored or brushed off. It happened in a way that sent people back through years of history, reopening old debates and raising questions that many felt this family had never fully addressed publicly. Comment sections exploded, reposts flooded timelines, and suddenly people who thought they knew this story realized they had only been looking at the surface. But before we break down exactly what happened, before we peel back every layer of the situation, there's something you need to understand. The reality behind this story is heavier, more emotional, and far more complicated than any headline or social media post could ever prepare you for. Because this story isn't about one isolated incident. This goes back years. It reaches into grief, legal battles, money, family dynamics, motherhood, and a young girl growing up in the aftermath of one of hip-hop's greatest tragedies. And once you understand the entire timeline, trust me, that viral moment is going to land completely differently. Yo, what's good fam? Welcome back to the channel, and if you're new around here, just know we approach things a little differently. We don't simply follow headlines, we dig for the truth. We go beyond the social media chatter, beyond the court documents, and beyond the rumors to uncover the real human story hidden beneath all the noise. And today's topic deserves exactly that level of attention. So, with that being said, let's dive in. Before we can truly understand the situation involving Imani and her mother Tanisha Foster, we first need to understand who Nipsey Hussle was before fame changed everything. Born Amias Joseph Ashkadum, Nipsey was raised in Crenshaw, Los Angeles, deeply connected to the community that shaped nearly every aspect of his life: his music, his business mindset, his loyalty, and the way he loved the people around him. Nipsey wasn't just talking about the streets in his lyrics, he was actively investing in them and creating something built to outlive him: a legacy, a vision. Long before the Grammy Awards, the business ventures, and the status as a cultural icon, he was simply a young man navigating life and relationships the same way most people do, one chapter at a time. Tanisha Foster was part of that early chapter in Nipsey's life. This wasn't some quick fling or casual relationship that people could easily write off. The two shared genuine history and a meaningful connection, and from that relationship came their daughter. Imani Ashkadum was born in 2008. From the very beginning, she became one of the most important people in Nipsey's world. Those who knew him personally often spoke about how devoted he was as a father, how involved he remained in his children's lives, and how seriously he took the responsibility of parenthood, with Imani standing as proof of that commitment. As time went on, Nipsey entered a highly public relationship with actress Lauren London, and together they welcomed their son, Cross, in 2016. Their relationship quickly became one of the most recognized love stories in entertainment.
Before long, Lauren London and Nipsey Hussle's names had become almost inseparable in the public eye. Within the culture, Lauren London eventually became inseparable from Nipsey's public image, and after Nipsey was tragically killed, many people looked to her as the visible symbol of that pain and mourning. But through it all, Imani remained exactly what she had always been: his daughter, a living piece of him from before the fame, and someone who would continue carrying his legacy long into the future. The co-parenting dynamic between Nipsey and Tanisha during his lifetime was something they largely kept away from the spotlight. Nipsey was never the kind of person to air out family business for the world to see. He handled personal matters with a level of maturity, discipline, and purpose that most people strive to reach. Based on interviews, public comments, and accounts from those close to the family, one thing appears clear: Imani had a meaningful relationship with her father. She had access to him. She was close to him. The bond between father and daughter was genuine, strong, and very much alive. Whatever disagreements or challenges may have existed between Nipsey and Tanisha as co-parents, they seemed determined to shield Imani from the worst of it whenever possible. That's what responsible parents try to do. They carry the burden of conflict so their children don't have to. But here's the part of Tanisha Foster's story that often gets overlooked. Long before Nipsey Hussle became a household name, before the Marathon clothing store, before the Grammy recognition, and before the murals covered city walls, Tanisha was already an important part of his life. She was there during the early grind, when he was still chasing dreams, building his future, and when the name Nipsey Hussle carried weight in Los Angeles streets but hadn't yet reached audiences around the world. And that's important context because it reminds people that Tanisha and Nipsey's relationship wasn't simply a side note in his story, it was a real chapter in his life. Then everything changed on March 31, 2019. Nipsey Hussle was shot and killed outside his Marathon clothing store, a business he built from the ground up in the same neighborhood that raised him. He was only 33 years old. The grief that followed was immediate and worldwide. Tributes poured in from fellow artists, athletes, political figures, and leaders from across the country. Los Angeles honored him with a public memorial attended by tens of thousands of people. But while millions mourned a cultural icon, two children were dealing with a much more personal loss. They had lost their father, not a celebrity, not a public figure, but simply their dad. Cross had his mother, Lauren London, there to support him through that unimaginable pain. Imani's circumstances, however, would prove far more complicated, because her biological mother, Tanisha Foster, and members of Nipsey's family, especially his brother, Black Sam, were soon drawn into a guardianship dispute that would unfold publicly for years. And as that legal battle intensified, some of the most personal and sensitive details of Tanisha's life would become public discussion. Details that the internet often amplified, sometimes without context and not always fairly. In the months following Nipsey's death, members of the Asghedom family moved to establish guardianship over Imani. Their arguments centered around stability and maintaining consistency in her life. Imani had long-standing relationships with her grandmother, her uncle, and her younger brother, Cross, all within the Asghedom family circle. After losing her father in such a sudden and traumatic way, they believed removing her from that support system could create even more emotional damage for a child, already carrying an unimaginable amount of grief.
While already trying to survive an unimaginable loss, Nipsey's family believed Imani should remain surrounded by the people, values, and environment that had always connected her to her father's legacy. But this is where the story takes a complicated turn. Because standing on the other side of that argument was Tanisha Foster, Imani's biological mother. And no matter what opinions people may have held about her personal circumstances at the time, she still had both a legal right and a deeply personal bond with her daughter that could not simply be dismissed. As the legal battle unfolded, many of those personal circumstances were suddenly brought into public view in ways that were painful and uncomfortable for everyone involved. Court filings from that period revealed serious concerns regarding Tanisha's situation. And this is where things become especially heavy, because the image painted in those documents was far from positive. According to filings submitted by attorneys representing Nipsey's family, Tanisha had previously dealt with criminal issues. Questions were also raised about whether she could consistently provide a stable home environment. Additional concerns centered around her financial situation and whether she possessed the resources and long-term stability needed to support a child who had just experienced the traumatic loss of her father. These weren't rumors spreading across social media timelines. These were allegations formally presented in court documents by legal representatives for Nipsey's family. Now, it's important to slow down and recognize something here. In custody disputes, attorneys on both sides are hired to build the strongest case possible for their clients. That often means examining the opposing party's past, struggles, weaknesses, and personal history under a microscope, then presenting those details in the most damaging light possible. And that's not always the same thing as establishing objective truth. Sometimes it's simply legal strategy. The problem comes when court filings become public, blogs pick them up, YouTube channels amplify them, and social media spreads them to millions of people who were never inside that courtroom. Suddenly, legal arguments start being treated as undisputed facts. And honestly, that's a distinction much of the online conversation surrounding this case completely overlooked. What made this guardianship battle even more intense was the financial aspect. And this is the part that truly sent the internet into overdrive and kept people talking for years. Shortly after Nipsey's passing, details regarding his estate began surfacing publicly. Reports suggested that Nipsey Hussle's estate was worth approximately $11 million, with his children, including Imani, listed as beneficiaries. That's a substantial amount of money by any standard. And the moment those figures became public opinion surrounding the custody dispute changed almost overnight. Suddenly, the discussion wasn't just about where Imani should live or who would oversee decisions involving her education and well-being. People began focusing on money, specifically who might benefit financially from being involved in Imani's life. And Tanisha Foster quickly found herself at the center of that scrutiny. The accusations that followed were direct, harsh, and relentless. Across social media, comment sections, blogs, and YouTube videos, many people openly accused Tanisha Foster of having ulterior motives. Many people claimed that Tanisha had played only a limited role in Imani's life, while Nipsey was still alive, and that once he passed away and reports surfaced about a multi-million-dollar estate, she suddenly became eager to reclaim a bigger role as Imani's mother. That quickly became the dominant narrative online. And once that narrative took hold, it spread like wildfire. But before we simply accept what the internet decided, we need to slow down and really examine those claims, because this situation deserves more than a social media verdict. First, let's talk about money.
How situations like this actually work from a financial standpoint, because the reality is far less dramatic than many people were led to believe. When a parent has custody of a child who is named as a beneficiary in a sizable estate, things don't automatically work the way many online commentators assumed. In most cases, a deceased parent's assets designated for a child are placed into a trust. That trust is then managed by an appointed trustee, whether that's an attorney, financial institution, or another approved individual. The funds inside that trust are intended specifically for the child's needs: education, medical care, housing, and other expenses related to their well-being. Simply having custody of the child does not automatically grant a parent unrestricted access to those funds. They cannot freely withdraw money whenever they choose, nor can they legally spend trust assets on personal expenses without substantial oversight and legal accountability. The popular online belief that gaining custody of Imani automatically meant gaining access to millions of dollars was a major oversimplification, and it fueled a tremendous amount of criticism directed at Tanisha. Second, and this rarely gets mentioned in conversations about this case, Tanisha Foster didn't suddenly appear after Nipsey's passing. She had always been Imani's biological mother. Regardless of what her relationship with Nipsey looked like during his lifetime, and regardless of how their co-parenting arrangement functioned, she remained part of Imani's life in one form or another. Portraying her as someone who emerged only after money became involved made for an easy storyline, but that doesn't necessarily make it an accurate one. Third, it's important to look at what Tanisha was actually seeking through the court system. She was fighting for a greater parental role in her daughter's life. She was challenging a guardianship arrangement that had significantly limited her involvement with Imani. Those are battles many parents choose to fight, and while aspects of her past and personal circumstances gave the opposing side material to use against her in court, fighting to remain involved in your child's life is not automatically the same thing as pursuing financial gain. Those are two separate issues, and blending them together oversimplifies a very complicated situation. Now, were financial considerations part of the legal battle? Almost certainly, because that's simply the reality in cases involving large estates. Whenever a child stands to inherit significant assets, questions about guardianship and custody naturally carry financial implications. Issues surrounding who pays for the child's expenses, what support comes from the estate, and who participates in decisions regarding the child's financial future inevitably become part of the discussion. Lawyers on both sides undoubtedly understood those realities. Pretending money played absolutely no role in these proceedings would ignore the obvious, but reducing the entire dispute to nothing more than a cash grab also ignores the very real maternal aspect of what Tanisha was fighting for. And that's a perspective many people online chose to overlook. So let's pull back for a second and look at Tanisha Foster as a person, because in much of the coverage surrounding this story, that part often got lost completely. Throughout much of the coverage surrounding this story, Tanisha Foster was often portrayed more like a character than an actual person. In many online narratives, she was cast as the villain, Nipsey's family became the heroes, and Imani was placed at the center as the prize everyone was fighting over. That framing made for dramatic headlines and viral conversations, but it left very little room for complexity. Tanisha was a woman who shared a child with a man who eventually grew into one of the most respected and celebrated figures in modern hip-hop. During Nipsey's lifetime, their co-parenting relationship reportedly had its ups and downs, just like countless other families. But after his tragic death, she suddenly found herself dealing not only with the loss of her daughter's father, but also entering a legal battle against his family. A family that had significant resources, overwhelming public support, and a strong desire to preserve Nipsey's legacy and protect those closest to it. At the same time, Tanisha had to navigate that fight while some of the most personal details of her life were being exposed through court filings, transformed into blog headlines, and ultimately turned into ammunition in comments sections across the internet. Whatever mistakes she may have made, whatever hardships she had experienced, those struggles were now being examined in the harshest and most public way imaginable. Yet, despite all of that, she continued showing up. She continued filing motions. She continued fighting through the court system for greater access, expanded rights, and a larger presence in her daughter's everyday life. As the case progressed, the courts were forced to wrestle with a difficult question. How should concerns raised about Tanisha's past and personal circumstances be weighed against the fundamental rights she held as Imani's biological mother? Because in the American legal system, parental rights are not easily taken away. Those rights carry significant constitutional protections, and regardless of concerns surrounding financial instability or previous legal troubles, the opposing side still had to meet an extremely high legal standard to justify severely restricting a mother's involvement with her child. Invisible grief carries its own burden, and sometimes it changes people in ways outsiders struggle to understand. From the outside, it can appear as absence, poor decisions, or irresponsibility. But from the inside, it may simply be what survival looks like when very few people are checking on you and even fewer are offering help. That's a reality that often gets lost in conversations like this. Now, let's talk about how the legal battle evolved over time, because this situation was far from a quick resolution. The dispute stretched across several years and moved through multiple stages before anything resembling stability emerged. In the immediate aftermath of Nipsey's passing, guardianship arrangements placed Imani primarily in the care of the Ashkadam family. Nipsey's brother, Black Sam, became one of the key figures in providing that support. From the outside looking in, Imani appeared to be growing up in a stable and loving environment deeply connected to her father's legacy. She attended family gatherings. She appeared at memorials and tributes. She remained surrounded by people who knew Nipsey personally and could share stories, lessons, and memories about who he truly was. But Tanisha Foster had no intention of quietly stepping away from her daughter's life. Tanisha never accepted a permanent role from the sidelines. She kept filing motions. She continued fighting through the court system for greater access, expanded rights, and a larger presence in her daughter's everyday life. As the case progressed, the courts were forced to wrestle with a difficult question. How should concerns raised about Tanisha's past and personal circumstances be weighed against the fundamental rights she held as Imani's biological mother? Because in the American legal system, parental rights are not easily taken away. Those rights carry significant constitutional protections, and regardless of concerns surrounding financial instability or previous legal troubles, the opposing side still had to meet an extremely high legal standard to justify severely restricting a mother's involvement with her child.
Financial issues also remained part of the conversation as Nipsey's estate continued moving through the legal process. As more details emerged regarding the value of his assets and long-term plans for his children's financial futures, Tanisha's legal team paid close attention. Court filings addressed matters involving financial support for Imani, the estate's responsibilities regarding her care, and questions surrounding who would ultimately make decisions concerning her inheritance and future resources.
These were legitimate legal issues. In fact, they were exactly the types of questions attorneys representing any custodial or co-custodial parent would be expected to raise under similar circumstances. But every time those issues surfaced, they reinforced the public perception that Tanisha was motivated primarily by money, even though the reality appeared far more complicated than that simple narrative suggested. As the years passed, the public conversation surrounding the case began taking on a life of its own. Online communities had already decided who the heroes and villains were. Tanisha Foster had largely been portrayed as an absent, opportunistic mother attempting to benefit from Nipsey's legacy. Meanwhile, Black Sam and the Asghedam family were often viewed as the honorable guardians protecting Imani from outside influences. And sadly, Imani herself became the subject of endless online discussion, speculation, and scrutiny in ways no child should ever have to endure. Lost in all of that noise was the actual complexity of the situation. Two imperfect realities were colliding. A child was growing up in the center of a deeply emotional and legal conflict that offered no clear-cut heroes or villains. Grief, family loyalty, money, and maternal love were all intertwined in the same story, and none of those elements existed in a simple or purely black and white way. Then, something unexpected began to happen. By 2025, a development that many people following the case from the beginning never truly anticipated finally took place. Tanisha Foster and Nipsey's family reportedly reached an agreement. After years of legal filings, court appearances, media coverage, and painful back-and-forth exchanges, both sides found common ground. The resolution that emerged reportedly established a joint legal and physical custody arrangement, with Black Sam continuing to play an important role, while Tanisha gained a more substantial presence in Imani's upbringing and day-to-day life. Really take a second and think about that. After years of public conflict and emotional battles, the people at the center of this story ultimately found a way to move forward together. Years of court filings, years of headlines, social media debates, YouTube breakdowns, and endless public opinions, all while Imani was growing up in the middle of it all. Yet eventually, both sides reached a point where they seemingly decided, enough, it's time to focus on what's truly best for this child. That's not the kind of ending that generates explosive headlines. It's not scandalous, but it is important, because it suggests that at some point, the adults involved chose Imani over the conflict. And honestly, that matters far more than any viral story ever could. Now let's shift our focus to Imani herself, because while all of this was unfolding around her, she was still growing up. She was still living her life. She has attended tributes honoring her father. She has appeared at events celebrating his legacy. Over the years, she's been photographed, discussed, analyzed, and commented on by countless people who have never met her and have no real understanding of what her everyday life actually looks like. And despite all of that attention, she continues moving forward. There's something undeniably powerful about watching a child carry a legacy as enormous as Nipsey Hussle's. Nipsey wasn't simply a successful rapper, he became a symbol, a movement. His face still covers murals throughout Los Angeles. His music continues to echo through barbershops, shops, neighborhood streets, and car speakers. His marathon mindset continues inspiring people who never even had the opportunity to meet him. And Imani walks through life knowing that the man celebrated in all of those spaces wasn't just a cultural icon to her. He was her father. He was dad. Imani is now reaching an age where she's beginning to form her own understanding of who Nipsey really was and what his legacy means. She's entering a stage of life where she can start separating the public image from the private man she personally knew. She can ask her own questions about his life, his decisions, and the legacy he left behind. More importantly, she can decide for herself what kind of relationship she wants to have with that legacy moving forward. That's a journey no court ruling, guardianship agreement, or internet narrative can truly control. That process belongs entirely to her. and watching her navigate that path while the adults around her slowly, imperfectly, and sometimes painfully work toward peace may be one of the most human aspects of this entire story. Over the years, Imani has continued appearing at events connected to her father's legacy. She has stood alongside relatives and loved ones who cared deeply about Nipsey. She has participated in the ongoing effort to preserve his impact within the very community he invested so much into. And none of that happened because a judge ordered it or because paperwork required it. It happened because she is his daughter, and that bond doesn't disappear. She carries pieces of him everywhere she goes, in her name, in her features, and in those quiet, deeply personal ways children carry their parents long after they're gone. At the same time, countless milestones in Imani's life are taking place away from cameras and headlines. She's growing up. She's discovering who she is outside the shadow of her father's fame. She's building her own identity and writing her own story. And perhaps the greatest thing the internet could do for Imani Asghedom is allow her the space to do exactly that, without constantly reducing her to a character in someone else's narrative. Now, with all of that in mind, it's worth stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, because this story is about far more than just a custody battle. At its core, this story reflects something we see happen repeatedly in our culture, yet rarely stop long enough to truly examine. When a public figure dies, especially someone young whose life ends tragically, the people left behind often lose their privacy overnight. Their pain becomes content, their family disagreements become public spectacle, their legal struggles turn into headlines, reaction videos, and endless online debates. And the people most affected, the children, the parents, the siblings desperately trying to keep their lives together, rarely get a choice in any of it. Whether they want the attention or not, the internet usually decides that their story belongs to everyone. And that's a reality worth thinking about. The words we choose matter more than many people realize. The moment we describe something as an exposure, we've already assigned blame. We've already suggested that someone was hiding wrongdoing and that the truth has finally been revealed. That kind of framing shapes public opinion in powerful ways. Millions of people begin looking at a real human being through that lens. In this case, that person was Tanisha Foster, a woman whose full story most people never truly knew, and, if we're being honest, never really tried to understand. Instead, she was often reduced to the role of villain in a story that was never nearly that simple, because real life rarely fits neatly into categories of hero and villain. At the end of the day, Nipsey Hussle's legacy exists in many different forms. It lives through the music, it lives through the Marathon brand on Slauson, it lives through the community investments, the murals painted across Los Angeles, and the principles he left behind. But perhaps most importantly, it also lives through a young woman named Imani Asghedom, who continues growing up carrying his name, his love, and many of the traits that remind people of him. Along with that comes a quiet but enormous responsibility, the responsibility of being Nipsey Hussle's daughter. Imani didn't ask for the chaos that followed after her father's passing. She didn't create the headlines, she didn't file legal motions, she didn't write the YouTube titles or fuel online debates. She simply continued living her life. And maybe, in a lot of ways, that's one of the most Nipsey-like qualities about her. Because if Nipsey taught anything, it was this: the marathon continues. Even when life becomes difficult, even when the road feels endless, even when the world makes the journey harder than it needs to be, you keep moving forward, you keep building, you keep going.